Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Simon O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak against this bill, but in doing so I do acknowledge the work that Dr. David Clark had done. At the heart of it, Mr. Speaker, is that my concern is that this bill uses Anzac Day and Waitangi Day as an excuse for a holiday. And if we want to talk about more holidays, then let's talk about that. But this is talking about using Anzac Day and Waitangi Day as an excuse for a holiday. But, Mr. Speaker, I would not dare to put words into the mouths of men who fought and died in Gallipoli. I'm going to use my speech to allow them to speak for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I've been looking over the diary of George Bollinger. He was born in Taranaki in 1890. At the age of 24, he headed off to war and he did not return. But he left us his diaries, and in them his experiences and his thoughts live on. Mr. Speaker, he arrived at Gallipoli the day after the 25th of April 1915, which incidentally was a Sunday. He described the Monday following the very first Anzac Day as follows, and I quote, "Monday, 26th of April, 3:15 a.m. Pax on was roared out. Torpedo destroyers are alongside to take us ashore. 9:40 a.m. On shore in the thick of it. The first casualty in our company was in my section. Just before dawn, we were on the destroyers waiting for surf boats to take us ashore. Stray bullets were landing around us, and suddenly Private Toohill, who was standing just in front of me, dropped with a bullet through his shoulder. Immediately after, Private Swain was shot on the forehead. It was a relief to get ashore. The Australians were frightfully cut about affecting a landing yesterday. They say there are at least 6,000 casualties. They did heroic work, and the whole world will know of it. We are in a gully immediately behind the firing line and will be called in to relieve at any moment. 2 New Zealand battalions were in last night and got cut about. The Turks have overwhelming numbers, and it is a perfect wonder how the Australians captured these heights." He goes on, "In landing, as many as 49 were killed in one boat, and a whole regiment was practically wiped out. The din and roar and whistle of the missiles is awful. As we sit here, the ambulance are passing with wounded on stretchers. 5 p.m. We climbed the heights to take our place in reserve to firing line. We are right in the fire zone and saw some awful sights. That, Mr. Speaker, was how the first Monday after the first Anzac Day was spent by the people we commemorate each year at dawn. The days that followed are no less harrowing." The Lieutenant goes on, "Tuesday the 27th of April. At daylight this morning, a terrific artillery duel raged. The Turks put hundreds of shells onto our landing place. At 10 a.m, we marched north along the beach, and as we got under the heights, we met crowds of wounded coming down. Oh, how callous one gets. Word rushed down from above for Hawke's Bay and Wellington West Coast companies to reinforce at the double as our fellows were getting massacred. We threw off packs and forgot everything in that climb up the cliffs. We fixed bayonets, and on reaching the top, we got into it. The country is terribly hilly, covered with scrub from 4 to 5 feet high. On we rushed against a rain of bullets, and our men began to drop over before they fired a shot. We started to get mixed and were everywhere amongst the Australians. Our men were dropping in the hundreds. Mr. Speaker, this might be inconvenient to some in the House, but these are the words of the men who work in Anzac Day, and it's a terrible, inconvenient truth that they want to shout down, and I find that's a terrible thing." The Lieutenant carries on, and the House would do well to listen. "Wednesday the 28th of April. We were relieved about 8 o'clock. Mostly our nerves were gone. We retired back and tried to rest. Our casualties were very heavy. We manned the trenches at 6 o'clock. Just going to pause there for a moment, Mr. Speaker. I know it, again, seems a terrible inconvenience to the House that they must listen to the history and the purpose of what we talk around Anzac Day, because it's very easy to try and turn this into a discussion of holidays and days off and how we might have a barbecue and so forth. And yet, you take a war diary, Mr. Speaker, you take a war diary of a man younger than just about everyone sitting in this House. You take a war diary and you utter his words in this House, and it's so inconvenient that the contempt of heckling begins. Mr. Speaker, Wednesday the 28th of April, we were relieved about 8 o'clock, and mostly our nerves were gone. We retired back and tried to rest. Our casualties were very heavy. We manned the trenches around 6 o'clock, no sleep and nothing to eat, just a craving for drink, and the wounded always empty our bottles. The Turkish trenches are now on a ridge about 200 yards away. Our warships are shelling them, but unfortunately they've also accounted for a number of our casualties. Mr. Speaker, Second Lieutenant Bollinger survived Gallipoli, and he went on to fight on other battlefields. He was wounded at Mazin on the 8th of June in 1917, and he died of his wounds 2 days later. Lieutenant Bollinger was just 27. Mr. Speaker, I've read this because if one wishes to increase the number of paid holidays in New Zealand, then let's have a conversation about that. But, Mr. Speaker, let's not dishonour the horrors that befell so many people on the 25th of April 1915 by turning it into nothing more than a long weekend. Mr. Speaker, Anzac Day is not a holiday, and it should not be used as an excuse for a holiday. May they rest in peace.
Is the member calling? I couldn't hear him. I call the honourable member Brendan Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It appears my microphone wasn't turned on, sir, but it is.